Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to this ordinary meeting, the June ordinary meeting for the Sunshine Coast Council. My welcome to the members of the public in the gallery, to our staff, to councillors, and to those who are joining us via live stream. If I can ask the chamber to be upstanding, I'll call on Councillor Jason O'Prey to provide an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians.
Yes, good morning and thank you, Mr Mayor, and Wanyanellam. On behalf of Council, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the Sunshine Coast local government area, the Kabi Kabi, Gubbi Gubbi peoples of the coastal plains and northern hinterland, and on whose traditional lands we gather here today, and the Yinabara peoples of the southern hinterland. We wish to pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role that First Nations people continue to play within our Sunshine Coast community. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Prey. Please remain upstanding, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Maureen Khan, a representative of the Islamic faith, to deliver a blessing. Thank you, Maureen.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. We seek refuge in Allah, our Creator, our Lord, from the outcast Satan. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We begin in the name of Allah, our Lord, the most gracious, the most merciful. Rabbana atina min ladunka rahmatan wa hayyi lana min amrina rashada. Our Lord, grant us mercy from Thee and provide for us a right course in our affair. Amen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Good morning to you all and peace be on all of you. Alhamdulillah, we begin with gratitude for each member of our community and our council, particularly the Mayor and the councillors present among us today, and the opportunity that we all have to come together to do good. Help us, our Lord, to help others achieve the peace and prosperity that we enjoy in our beautiful Sunshine Coast. Help us to be moral leaders and guides for the betterment of all people. We ask you, O our Creator, to give us leaders whose hearts are large enough to mesh the breadth of our own souls, and give us souls strong enough to follow leaders of vision. Strengthen them with wisdom and grace for the heavy burdens they carry. May they manage their teams and projects with love. O Allah, we are powerless, speechless, and helpless. We pray through you to protect us and our leaders from falling into mistakes and guide them through this meeting and beyond, so they grow from strength to strength towards transforming Sunshine Coast into the most livable, welcoming, diverse and peaceful cities in Queensland, if not Australasia. Please give us the patience to continue to learn from one another and work towards a more peaceful and kind community. Amen. Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity, as today is the 3rd of Zilhajj, which is one of the most blessed months of the Islamic calendar, when we have got pilgrims at the moment in Holy Makkah. Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Maureen. Please be seated. We have an apology from Councillor Dixon, who, as I advised earlier, he and his wife Samantha have just had their first child, and he's on parental leave, so we wish them well. Councillor Landsberg is joining us via Teams. Item 4 is the receipt and confirmation of minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 25th of May. Councillor Cox, happy to move. Councillor Winston, happy to second. All those in favour of receipt? That's carried unanimously. Got Councillor Landsberg, thank you. There's no mayoral minute. Item 6 refers to informing around any conflicts of interest. Councillors, I'd remind you of the requirements of Chapter 5B of the Local Government Act 2009, which sets out how councillors' conflicts of interest can be managed, or are to be managed indeed. These requirements apply to how we will deal with such matters at this meeting. So should you have a prescribed conflict or a declarable conflict, please raise that ahead of the item we'll be addressing. I want to go to item 7, presentations, and we have 5 presentations. The first from Councillor Johnston. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and fellow councillors. I'm proud to present you with this award for Hannah Maloney, Community and Animal Education Supervisor in the Customer Response Branch. Following success at the recent State Local Government Managers Association, that's the LGMA Awards, for excellence events, Hannah has been recognised for going above and beyond for her work to educate the community about responsible pet ownership. The annual Awards for Excellence program recognises the best of local government initiatives in the state, noting the differing environments and communities that local government serves. The Above and Beyond Award category goes to an individual who has gone above and beyond their stated duties to deliver an added service to their community or council, showing genuine initiative for the benefit of the organisation and ultimately our customers. Hannah is the author of the heartwarming story When Sammy Meets Sonny, which was published in 2022. The book follows a boy named Sammy who wants to prove to his parents he was responsible in his desire to own a dog. This is the story of adventure, emotion and perseverance. Our community loves animals, with more than 64,700 animals registered in the Sunshine Coast region. Approximately 42,500 households own a dog, a cat or both. We want to work with the community to ensure everyone understands their responsibility as pet owners, and this new book helps us to reach our youngest members of the community. Hannah helped develop council management plan for domestic animals and facilitates council's kindergarten and school program about responsible pet ownership. The book idea was initiated by Hannah as she was looking for an educational tool to assist with the classroom program she delivers and to reach more children about safety around animals. Hannah was unable to locate a suitable resource, so she completed a course on writing children's books and wrote it herself, in addition to her normal workload with no additional remuneration. Hannah also mapped the program to the prep and Year 1 education curriculum. Hannah's aim was to benefit the community through educating children, parents and teachers in relation to animal safety and reduce the number of dog attacks on children. The book was released in June 2022, approximately 12 months ago. The statistics for dog attacks on children under 12 between September 22 and March the 31st this year show a decrease of 40% when compared with the same period in 21-22. Hannah has promoted the book via Book Week events in schools and libraries and Dog Safety Week events. The book is also for sale online and in our council office, as well as copies available in our libraries. All proceeds go to educating children on the Sunshine Coast about animal safety. Congratulations to Hannah. What a wonderful achievement. And we are very proud of you. I look forward to hearing about the release of Book 2, With Love Comes Responsibility, later this year. Special mention to illustrator Kylene Marie from our graphic design team who illustrated the book. And I actually purchased a couple of copies of this book when it was first released and gave it to my granddaughter who attends one of the schools in Caloundra, and she was so excited, she just loved it. So Hannah, congratulations. Now remember, that's what's staying in the office. considering that Hannah wasn't paid anything for doing this, at least you did let her keep it. Thank you.
Well done. Okay, Councillor Johnson, you're happy to move. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hungerford, thank you. All those in favour of receipt? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to the second presentation is Councillor Suarez, the Kids in Action program. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. I'm honoured to present the Kids in Action, this award, which is the winner of the Local Government Awards of Excellence 2023, Excellence in Community Shaping. Sustainability is a core value and mission of the Sunshine Coast Council, and it's encapsulated by its vision to be Australia's most sustainable region, healthy, smart and creative. To accomplish this, Council is undertaking a range of environmental initiatives and projects across the region. However, effort is needed to build and mobilise a sustainable culture within the community itself. Kids in Action is a key mechanism for achieving this long-term cultural change. Pioneered by Sunshine Coast Council, the award-winning Kids in Action program has been operating since 2012. The program is a unique, strategic and innovative environmental education program which promotes environmental responsibility and stewardship. Kids in Action is a true legacy initiative, connecting schools with local environment groups and promoting learning exchanges between future and current environmental custodians. The program reaches far into the community and includes local environmental education providers, community groups, businesses, First Nations peoples, pre-service teachers, volunteers and other council departments. Financed through Council's environmental levy, with additional contributions by external sponsors and partners, the program is a true environmental legacy initiative that benefits the community by nurturing our future leaders and environmental custodians, supporting the intergenerational transfer of knowledge and skills regarding environmental restoration, preservation and protection through community connection, achieving long-term cultural change via a preferred community of practice and collaboration, including First Nations histories and perspectives, and stimulating an active regional network of teachers, environmental educators and community mentors. And just on that, a number of the children who have, or students I should say, who have gone through the Kids in Action program then go on to become volunteers within the program and community mentors, environmental mentors as well. The program also benefits Council by further embedding sustainability within the organisation's culture, enhancing Council's reputation and relationships with community stakeholders, and demonstrating Council's commitment to sustainability as an internationally recognised UNESCO-listed Biosphere reserve. And on that note, this year the Kids in Action theme is Biospheros, which the kids apparently have loved. We also help on delivering Council's vision to be Australia's most sustainable region. Kids in Action has and continues to deliver profoundly positive environmental, social, cultural and economic outcomes for the Sunshine Coast community. Kids in Action is not only shaping the Sunshine Coast community, it's transforming it. I present this award to Council for the Kids in Action program, winner of the Local Government Awards for Excellence 2023, Excellence in Community Shaping, on behalf of the much larger community of practice underpinning Kids in Action. And I'd like to present this award to Michael.
Thank you very much, Councillor Suarez. Well done. Sure we got that photograph all quite right, haven't we? Yeah. Councillor Suarez, I'll have you move that motion. Someone to second, please. Councillor Cox. All those in favour of receipt? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next presentation is Councillor Law on Shine a Light on Racism. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, councillors. It's, I think, really important for this particular campaign to be recognised with a graphic design win for Shine a Light on Racism. It's won the Silver Award in the GOV Design 2023 for graphic design in equity and inclusion. Working with our community planning and development branch led by Kerry Forrest, and in particular the community development team with Tim Burns and Kim Price, graphic designer Aisling Gormley harnessed her passion for equity and inclusivity. The Shine a Light on Racism campaign involved a community co-design process and featured local personalities as patrons who stand for the human experience of racism and our responsibility to respond. The campaign included a feature video, a landing page on the websites, a campaign collateral and education, and it used not only traditional proactive media communication tools, but website and social media and radio. Council's communication and graphic design team members during the campaign and the execution of the campaign was vital. It was to make sure that the intent and the key concepts were understood and that the story, messaging and imagery were developed in the right language and look and feel. Design assets were intentionally created without the council branding, enabling local businesses and communities to embrace the campaign, use the assets available to them, and all of this that you're seeing on the screen was designed by Aisling. Shine a Light on Racism campaign was successfully launched in July by Craig Foster, and the campaign aimed to find a balance by naming racism and its impacts and providing a call to action to learn how to become anti-racist. The campaign called on residents to do the work and to help address racism and actively learn to become an ally and to help anti-racism. It was spearheaded by 7 local patrons who were in video messages and the printed material so that they could be used throughout the year to shine a light on racism at a whole range of events and conversations with the community, sporting and business groups. The aim is to reach the dominant culture of the Sunshine Coast who are not normally the victim or target of racism and to support them to transition to a place of awareness about what racism is and how to become anti-racist. The campaign's first phase focused on individual racism and introduced the language and concept of being anti-racist. As our community learns more and engages with the concept of being anti-racist, the campaign focus will move towards institutionalised racism. The South Sydney Rabbitohs backed the campaign as part of the NRL game held at the Sunshine Coast Stadium, and Sunshine Coast Lightning also backed the campaign at a home game. And really importantly, the Queensland Human Rights Commission have also recognised the strength and value of this campaign for our community. It was important to name racism and to disrupt the status quo, and equally important not to name and point out the community as racist, because that can intensify those attitudes. The Shine a Light on Racism campaign will continue as an ongoing 5-year campaign, and I'm looking forward to the next stage happening this coming year. So congratulations to Aisling, who has given us such an outstanding set of materials to help support the campaign, and also to Kerry, the whole team, and especially our community patrons who brought this whole thing to life. Thank you all very much. Well done, Aisling.
Well done. Thank you and well done, Councillor Law. I'll take you as the mover. Someone to second, please. Councillor Natoli, thank you. All those in favour of receipt? Thank you very much. And we've got 2 more, and they're both with Councillor Suarez, and they both relate to the Sunshine Coast Biosphere. one being for the GOV Design Awards 2023 for graphic design, and the other for the LGX Award for Best Graphic Design. Over to you, Councillor Suarez. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, today I'm thrilled to announce that the Sunshine Coast Biosphere logo has won 2 graphic design awards. As the Mayor mentioned, we have the Silver GOV Design Awards 2023 for graphic design, identity and branding, and these awards recognise excellence in government graphic design and are heavily contested by public organisations across the world. The logo also won the Local Government Association of Queensland LGX Award for Best Graphic Design, competing against 70 other councils in Queensland. The logo was designed by our in-house graphic designer, Joseph Stevenson, and the Sunshine Coast Biosphere logo design reflects the partnership approach between council and community, which has been built through the nomination, planning and implementation phases of our Biosphere journey. No small task for Joseph, considering it could have been logo designed by committee, but he stuck true to his vision, and it was well regarded by everyone in the community reference group. The branding brief was to create a unique and meaningful identifier representing our Sunshine Coast Biosphere in the region, its history, community, lifestyle, economy and natural beauty. It needed to reflect the vibrancy and energy of the Sunshine Coast, provide flexibility of use and reflect the connections within our biosphere. As a brand representing the region, input and engagement was provided by members of our Biosphere Community Reference Group, which ensured community views and opinions were incorporated into the design process. This included providing advice and feedback on Sunshine Coast Biosphere logo design options, which helped to narrow it down to a concept that captured the distinctive elements of our biosphere. The brand features fanned-out leaves positioned in a radial pattern to show the energy of our region and the outward vision of our biosphere. Each leaf represents a different element of our biosphere, celebrating people and nature. The teal leaf represents our networking and relationships, social, cultural, environment and economic. The ochre leaf represents our hinterland, geology and ancient history, and also features the shoulder of Mount Tibrogargan. The green leaf represents us, the people element of our biosphere, and the central role we play in caring for our region now and into the future. The golden leaf represents sunshine, the brightness and energy of our region. And finally, the blue leaf represents our coastal environment and waterways. While creating a recognisable visual identity for the Sunshine Coast Biosphere, the branding is also required to inform and resonate with our community to create a sense of ownership, ensure positive engagement and support action for a sustainable Sunshine Coast. I'm sure you'll agree the final logo design reflects the brand's symbolism and characteristics and its relevance for a range of audiences and potential uses now and into the future. Congratulations to designer Joseph Stevenson and to Catherine Scott, Strategic Project Officer for the Biosphere, who along with Council's project team and the Biosphere Community Reference Group members were instrumental in this game changer project. So congratulations to both of you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Suarez. I'll bundle those into one motion. Moved by you, seconded by Councillor Law. Thank you. And all those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, we'll move on to the first report, item 8.1, development permit for other change, material change of use. Call on John Borthwick. Sorry, Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I, Councillor Joe Natoli, notified that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item 8.1 to be considered at the ordinary meeting today. Due to having known John Donald Elks, Director of Woodlands Enterprise Pty Limited since the 1980s, through my close association with him, we were both members of the Caloundra Cricket Club One of my best friends is his brother-in-law, and I think it's appropriate that I not participate in this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Natoli. Councillor O'Prey.
I, Councillor Jason O'Prey, notify that I may have a declarable conflict of interest in item 8.1 to be considered at the ordering meeting today, 22nd of June 23, due to the fact that my partner, Ms Natasha Poole, is a member of the Animal Justice Party. I'm making this declaration out of an abundance of caution, and in doing so, wish to highlight that neither Ms Poole nor the Animal Justice Party have made any submissions to this application, either properly or not properly made submissions, on the development application that is considered by Council today. I'm also unaware of any representations made by Ms Poole or the Animal Justice Party to Council in relation to this development application, and I can also confirm that neither Ms Poole nor the Animal Justice Party have made any representations to me personally on this application. In consideration of this declarable conflict of interest, and in particular the very remote nature of any such interest, if it indeed exists, I am of the opinion that I can participate in this discussion and vote on the matter, and in doing so, my participation will not lead to a decision that is contrary to the public interest. Further, I acknowledge the eligible councillors must, by resolution, decide my participation or otherwise, making a further decision on this matter. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Prey. Councillors, in accordance with section 150 ES brackets 3 brackets B brackets I of the Local Government Act 2009, I now call for a councillor to move that Councillor O'Prey either stay or leave the chamber for the duration of the discussion and any decision on this matter. Councillors, should the majority decide it's in the public interest for the councillor to stay in the meeting for the duration of this matter, reasons for this decision will need to be recorded, and they will be on the screen there, listed 1 to 5. Somebody prepared to move, please. Councillor Suarez.
Mr Mayor, I move that Councillor O'Prey may participate in the discussions.
And the reason for that, Councillor?
The reason is that the interest is not considered to be sufficient to undermine the ability of the councillor to form an impartial view and exercise their vote in the public interest.
Thank you. Is there any contrary view? Can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Hungerford. Anyone wish to speak further on the matter? No, we'll put the matter to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor O'Prey staying? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Rightio, let's move on with the presentation. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good morning, councillors. This application is for an other change, a development permit for a material change of use of premises.
John, could you just bring that mic around a little bit? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
To extend an existing intensive animal industry, which is a poultry farm, located at 325-367 Red Road, Beerburrum. The application is before Council at Councillor Babarowski's request. The site is located to the west of the Bruce Highway. It's accessed via Red Road from the Steve Irwin Way. To the west of the Steve Irwin Way is the Beerburrum Township and the residential areas, closest residential areas to the site. The aerial photograph shows the existing site. It's about 31 hectares with a combination of both sites. Rams Road is to the west, it's an unconstructed road. Red Road is to the southern boundary. There's 4 existing sheds on the site. As you can see from the aerial, it's pretty much half of the site is cleared. The sensitive area, which contains the wetland and vegetation, is to the north of the site. There's approximately 130 to 180 metre buffer to the Bruce Highway. The second aerial photograph shows a wider area. Of importance is that there's a number of poultry farms within that area, and one of the most recent poultry farms was approved in April 2019 for approximately 433,000 birds. The site is zoned rural, and the surrounding area is predominantly rural zone, which is under the control of state forestry. The dark green area to the south and west of the site is an environmental management and conservation zone. The site falls under the South East Queensland Regional Plan within the regional landscape and rural production area. The closest residential area is about 3.2 kilometres away to Beerburrum. The closest resident is approximately 700 metres to the south. There is an existing approval over the site, that's why it's an other change. There's an existing approval it was approved in May 2000. It included 4 sheds and an environmental licence of up to 200,000 birds. It's been operating for over 20 years now. Approximate number of birds is 171,000 at this time. So the proposal is for another change. From the 4 existing poultry sheds, it's an additional 6 sheds and an additional lot where the new sheds are extending into. The gross floor area of the new sheds is 17,809 metres squared, and it will accommodate, the total number of sheds will accommodate approximately 452,640 birds. The sheds are located in close proximity and integrated into close to the existing sheds. It avoids any clearing of vegetation because it's on the cleared areas, avoids the wetlands and provides suitable buffers to the surrounding roads. The application was publicly notified between the 11th of January 2023 and the 2nd of February 2023. There were approximately 138 submissions received. Those were all in support of the proposed development. The application was referred to the Department of State Development, Infrastructure and Local Government and Planning, SARA, because of its proximity to the Bruce Highway main roads. They recommended approval of the development with conditions mainly pertaining to stormwater issues and the environmentally relevant activity for the number of birds. It's still, the environmentally relevant activity licence still has to be applied for. That hasn't been applied for yet. So the key assessment considerations in the detailed assessment that was undertaken included facts like the intensive animal industry, being a poultry farm, is a potentially consistent use within the rural zone. And the rural zone supports that use provided it meets certain environmental and amenity criteria and avoids adverse environmental impacts. The other issue is that intensive animal industry, poultry farm, is described in the planning scheme as a rural activity. And furthermore, it's under the South East Queensland Regional Plan. It's supported as a rural use. The use is also existing on the site. There's an existing poultry farm operating for 20 years. The assessment finds that the proposed development or the proposed extension substantially complies with the relevant provisions of the planning scheme. Because the site is large enough to accommodate the use and integrate into the existing sheds, it avoids clearing waterways and the wetland areas. It achieves sufficient buffers to roads, scenic route, as I've said, the waterways and other sensitive land uses, the closest being 700 metres away. It would not adversely affect any sensitive uses from a noise, odour or dust issue, and it remains for agricultural production. In conclusion, it's recommended that Council approve the application for another change to development permit for material change of use of premises to establish an intensive industry, poultry farm subject to reasonable and relevant conditions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Babarowski, you were moving.
Mr. Mayor, with respect, I'd like to move an alternative motion for refusal.
Someone to second an alternative motion? Councillor Cox, thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. If meeting management could bring up the alternative motion. So, councillors, you'll see that the alternative motion, and I feel that whilst I did my best to give you some advance notice for the sake of the gallery and the officers, I'd like to take the trouble to read it out, if I may, if the chair permits, or if you think it's sufficient to just read it.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, councillors, this is an alternative motion to refuse application number 1999-510068.01 for the following reasons. Number one, scale and intensity. The proposed development departs from the purpose and overall outcome 2V2 of the Rural Zone Code, as the use is not an appropriate use when considered in regard to its location, nature, scale and intensity. 2. Environmental impacts. The proposed development departs from the purpose and overall outcome 2B and Q of the Rural Zone Code, as adverse environmental impacts are not avoided or appropriately managed in the proposal. 3. Agricultural land. The proposed development A will alienate or fragment agricultural land class A and class B. The applicant has not demonstrated that 1. There is an overriding need for the proposed development in terms of public benefit, and 2. No other site is available for the purpose such as proposed by the proposed development. B. Will not conserve the productive characteristics of agricultural land classes A or class B. Accordingly, the proposed development does not comply with overall outcome 6.2.19.22J of the Rural Code Zones Code. Amenity 4. It has not been demonstrated that A, the proposed development will not result in unacceptable noise impacts on the surrounding sensitive uses. Accordingly, there is a non-compliance with the Rural Zone Code overall outcome 6.219.22B and G. 5. Suitability of the site and proposed setbacks. The proposed development constitutes a 260% material increase in the intensive rural use on the site and does not meet the minimum lot size requirements or provide adequate setbacks. Accordingly, there is a non-compliance with the Rural Uses Code overall outcome 9.3.16.2D and the performance outcomes PO2 and PO3. 6. Rural activities and amenity. As a consequence of the issues set out in reasons 1 to 3 above, the proposed development will result in unacceptable impacts on the existing and future rural activities on the subject land and surrounding area and the rural amenity of the surrounding area. Further, the subject land is within the regional interurban break. Accordingly, the proposed development does not comply with the overall outcome 6.2.1922P of the Rural Zone Code. If I may, now I'd like to commence speaking to the item.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, this intensification of a use is not a good planning outcome for this region, and I respectfully ask you to refuse this application on the grounds of its environmental risks, its impact on good agricultural land, and its inadequate site attributes. This is not an unknown pathway for us. In October 2021, this chamber refused an application for a puppy farm designed for the mass breeding of dogs confined to small spaces and subsequent sale of the puppies for profit. But we did this in large part due to the planning scheme considerations of scale and intensity. And it's worth noting this was before we very proudly became a biosphere. Councillors, in that case, the scale was dozens to hundreds of dogs. In the application before you now, it's 452,000 animals at any one time, potentially well in excess of 2 million per year, kept in far, far higher densities, in artificial and stressful conditions for the whole of their lives. Under our planning scheme, breeding of poultry falls under the category of intensive animal industry. Importantly, as you've heard, intensive animal industry is listed in the Rural Zone Code as a potentially consistent use, not simply as a consistent use. According to the Sunshine Coast Planning Scheme section 6.219.2 subsection 2V2, a potentially consistent use may occur in the rural zone only where further assessment has determined that the use is appropriate in the zone, having regard to such matters as its location, nature, scale and intensity. Further, subsection 2B states that the intensive animal industry may be established in the zone, providing that adverse environmental and amenity impacts are avoided or appropriately managed. I intend to bring to your attention that all of these factors of environment, amenity, location, nature, scale and intensity weigh strongly against this application for two main reasons. Firstly, the environmental and subsequent health impacts due to the proposed scale of the animal agriculture in a single location. Secondly, the effect this proposal would have on our region's reserves of good arable land class A and B. So I'll begin with the environmental health and health impacts. As you've heard, the development proposes to more than double the number of animals for a current approval of 200,000 to over 452,000 animals. Because these chickens are very specifically bred for meat, they are generally sent to slaughter when they reach a specific weight range at around 5 to 8 weeks. Non-factory farm chickens can live between 5 and 8 years, not weeks. And this unbelievably short life is not just an animal welfare issue, it's an environmental issue. Very large concentrations of a genetically narrow species kept in extremely close proximity, and in this case in subtropical climate conditions, can support the rapid spread of pathogens. The containment of many variants of bird flu is a rapidly escalating global challenge. There have already been more outbreaks of the most well-known bird flu, H5N1, in the 21st century than there were in the entire 20th century. Councillors, as we continue to experience COVID-19, none of us want to spend the rest of our lives deeply anxious about infectious diseases and pandemics. So governments at all levels need to take action to reduce the risk. Again, there is a growing body of research and wide world acknowledgement of the health risks of this kind of large-scale factory farming of chickens. And I'd like to quote Perry Kendall, the Chief Medical Officer of Health for British Columbia in Canada, who witnessed the 2004 Canadian outbreak of H5N1, which required the destruction of 19 million birds. He explained in an interview that birds kept indoors were significantly more vulnerable. He said, "You've got 10,000 birds in a small shed packed in together. They act like a petri dish."
Councillor, can I get you an extension?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Someone prepare to move. Councillor Johnston, seconder. Councillor O'Prey. Those in favour? Carry on.
Thank you very much. Councillors, the current proposal is to add 6 more closely located sheds that are not 10,000 birds per shed, but over 45,000 birds per shed. That's a total of 452 feathered test tubes in an incubator. New Zealand Government Food Safety Advisor Merrill Watts called for the end of chicken rearing in factory farms, pointing out that chickens can be sustainably reared in free-range systems that dramatically improves the bird's health and reduces the risk to humans. And the American Public Health Association, which is the largest association of public health professionals in the world, has in 2003 and 2009 urged federal, state and local authorities to impose an immediate moratorium on the building of new factory farms for birds and the expansion of existing ones. It's not just the experts passionately calling for immediate restraint. As you know, I was recently in the UK and caught sight in a local supermarket of this newspaper headline. Meeting management, bring up the image, please. This just illustrates the point that broad community awareness and anxiety is rising. and despite every modern biosecurity procedure, the risk is real and growing. Our vision is to be the most sustainable region, healthy, smart and creative, and the region has been recently declared a biosphere. This DA is not compatible with that vision and that designation, which we celebrated this morning with awards. But besides these health risks, there are specific technical reasons why this site is simply inappropriate. The proposal fails to meet the criteria in the siting and setback assessment codes shown in Table 9.3.16.33 of the report under the title Proposed Operations. It's on page 40 of 263 in the report. At 32, well, it's actually not 32 hectares, it's 31 hectares, as you heard. So it's 19 hectares less than the minimum 50 hectares required by this council, and less than a third of the size in the state guidelines of 100 hectares. Now, why require such an area of land? It's to achieve the site setbacks which are intended to control biohazard risks. Could I request that the meeting bring up the site on our own geomapping platform, please? Okay. Councillors, you will see that the additional shed to the east of the 4 sheds, actually in the map, sorry, it's not on this one because that's the actual map, but in your report, imagine the shed, the intended additional shed to the east of those 4 sheds, which is fitted in between Rams Road and those 4 sheds, is less than the minimum 100 metres to the eastern site boundary. Look at this scale of 100 metres in the bottom left-hand corner. The additional shed to the east of the 4 sheds is less than the minimum 100 metres to Rams Road. The additional shed to the east of the 4 sheds appears to be less than the minimum 100 metres to the wetland and less than the 200 metres stated in the officer report to a water body, paragraph 5, page 41 of 263. The proximity is especially important because research shows it's migratory birds, water birds, that are one of the main sources and the ways that bird viruses spread globally and between populations of poultry. In addition to these key criteria in the code's assessment table, we should also consider that the residential area of Beerburrum is 3.2 kilometres away, which is less than the minimum 5 kilometres. The proposed development is also within the roaming range of 1 to 5 kilometres of some domestic cats in the nearby township and certainly most feral cats, which have 3 to 10 kilometre ranges in surrounding vegetated areas, including state forests. And the proposed intensification occurs within the Pumicestown Passage catchment, which is just north of an internationally recognised Ramsar wetland. The report provides little detail on flood hazards, as the area is stated to be outside of Council's modelling extent. It also defers details of the modifications to the existing outflow arrangement or new detention systems to a yet unknown post-development stormwater management plan. So you have to ask yourself, how confident are you that this 260% expansion with all of the new hard stand and roof areas cope with a more frequent and sustained deluge events?
Councillor Babrowski, I'm going to get you one more extension.
One more. Thank you.
Someone move. Councillor Hungerford. Seconder, Councillor Cox. Those in favour? It's carried.
Thank you.
Carried. Councillor Law is not supportive, but carry on. You have a majority.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, councillors. Nearly there. Councillors, my second theme relates to the preservation of good arable land. This is not traditional farming. This type of intensive animal industry was virtually unknown before the 1960s, the mid-1960s, and is much more comparable to industrial manufacturing or the recent emergence of large-scale intensive horticulture, in that it requires little or no relationship to the land itself and introduces many more risks of the activity to the site. Both we and the state have policies to protect, key point, utilise good agricultural land class A and B. The intent is to use the land for its intrinsic qualities, principally soil quality. This report attempts to argue that the proposed development doesn't alienate the land from future use as good arable land? I think a reasonable person would say most definitely it does. Let's remind ourselves that a substantial proportion of the good quality land on this site is or will be under sheds, driveways and service areas. And the lack of natural processes, sun, rain, flora, etc., means that the soil biome is effectively made sterile. This was acknowledged in the advice Council received from the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries on the matter of industrialised farming. They specifically say that these industrial land users have the potential to permanently sterilise the land from cropping. They go on to say, if that's the case in this one, so be it. But we cannot afford to set or continue a pattern of being so dismissive of our good quality agricultural land and lose the opportunity to grow good quality crops, or in this instance, to trade that away to bring 452,000 lives into existence, to kill them and replace them in roughly 62-day cycles. Should we consider if our health, the planet, and the animals would be a lot better off if we just decided to eat the pellets? Clearly that's not going to happen, but let's at least acknowledge that that's all the poultry get to eat anyway. In conclusion, the Sunshine Coast does not have a domestic need for the additional supply. The additional information shows we already are the third largest supplier in the state, with a supply between 4 and 5 million birds across the 25 existing poultry farms within the region. We simply don't need any more. We can refuse this application on the specific planning scheme criteria of the land is not in the right location, as it is 3.2 kilometres to the township of Beerburn rather than the specified 5 kilometres. The land is not the right size at 19 hectares below our own minimum of 50 and 69 hectares below the state guidelines. And because the land is too small, the site setbacks fail to meet our minimum standards on distance to the wetland, distance to the road, and distance to the boundary. So if the environmental health and arable land factors were not compelling enough, the land size, location, and inadequate setbacks can be a basis for refusal alone. Councillors, I ask for your considered support for the alternative resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. Councillor Cox.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I might have a question maybe through, first of all, to Council Officer John. Councillor Babarowski's just quoted a couple of things in terms of the distance of 3.2 kilometres to the closest, I think it's sensitive receptor is the official term, but it's the residential community. And I think he suggested that there was supposed to be a minimum of 5 kilometres. Can you just maybe address that particular issue as to why it's been considered for recommendation for approval when it doesn't meet that particular guideline?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Cox. This is a performance-based planning scheme, so we look at the acceptable outcome is that 5 kilometres. We undertook a performance-based assessment of it. It's 3.2 kilometres away, across the Bruce Highway, across forestry lands, across the Steve Owen Way to that residential area. In between that and Beerburn, there's probably 2 or 3 other poultry farms. This is an existing poultry farm. Over the 20 years that it's been operating for, we've only had one submission in 2017 about odour issues. The report is supported by an odour report, a noise report, and a dust report. That was assessed by our internal specialists. The conclusion of that report and our specialists was that with the prevailing winds, with the distance away, there's more than suitable buffers to address any odour concerns, that it's within the environmental limits of the emissions, and that there would be no adverse impacts on that residential area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thanks very much for that answer. That was exactly what I thought you'd say. Look, councillors, I respect the right of Councillor Babarowski to move an alternate motion. And respectfully, one thing I noted, Councillor Babarowski, was the use of animal welfare in most or the majority of your supporting argument. And I'll just remind you that that's not a planning matter. So, councillors, please take that in mind when we're discussing this further today. I also just want to touch on our environment and livability section of the operational plan, which we just endorsed this morning at our budget meeting. Activity 2.1.5 specifically talks to planning for the protection of the regional interurban break into perpetuality. I think I got that right, sorry. To secure the environment, production and recreation values. Now, the production values are obviously the agricultural uses. So that is specifically in the operational plan that we just endorsed this morning. So I look at this report and the officer's recommendation, obviously, and I look at that there's no submissions against this particular development application. And normally when you get something like this, intensive sort of agricultural or poultry farm type of thing, we are inundated with objections, but there's been none of that. So I'll remind you that this is an existing use. It's been operating for 20 years. So that to me is quite a high criteria to consider in your deliberations today. And when we're looking for locations to base an agricultural use, such as a poultry farm, you want to be located in something like the regional interurban break because it has got those buffers. We've just had John's explanation of all of those buffers, the Bruce Highway, the forestry, and it's been assessed against, you know, buffers to the wetlands, the separation distances, the prevailing winds. So all of those things have actually been ticked off under the thorough assessment by the team and those experts. I also just wanted to mention the fact that South East Queensland is growing quite rapidly. And when I look at the demand for this type of product, this produce, eggs and white meat and the like, in a growing population like SEQ, there is going to be further demand for this type of use. The other thing to consider too is with a growing SEQ region that urban growth and that development keeps impacting those rural areas. Those rural agricultural areas are getting taken up with housing development, and then they're forcing these types of uses out. And so they'll be lost, those jobs will be lost. The opportunities for the existing business is lost. So councillors, I respect the right of the divisional councillor to make an alternative motion here today, but I certainly can't support it, and I hope that you understand the planning provisions are what we need to consider, and we can't consider animal welfare and the like.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Can I go to Councillor O'Prey, please?
Mr Mayor, a couple of questions before I speak to it, if I may. Two, really. Firstly, Councillor Cox has touched on already the interurban break. We're very, very protective of this space. Can you just make it clear for us how this is situated within the urban break?
Through you, Mr Mayor, to Councillor O'Prey. The site is located within the regional interurban break. Within the regional interurban break, urban development is pretty much limited, so only rural activities and some sort of other land uses can occur within this area, like, for example, nature-based tourism. So basically, there's no development envisaged within the regional interurban break, or any urban development, And this use, being intensive animal industry, is a rural activity that is supported by the rural zone in which it's located and supported by the South East Queensland Regional Plan, Regional Landscape and Rural Production Area as a rural use.
The question then, if I may, Mr. Mayor. So within the interurban break, which we've all been a party to and privileged to understand and get a very good, strong understanding that we're protecting it from buildings and houses predominantly. We're protecting it from commercial operations of smaller nature, but we're supportive of it in the form of this application. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. It's not an urban use. It's a rural activity use that's permitted.
I want to get the clarity there. So we're really protecting it in and around the housing particularly, and we're okay with it being commercial use like this application. Got it. The other question I had is about the setbacks.
Councillor, if I could just add something there. I think we've always adopted the rule of existing use rights.
Yep.
And that's largely agriculture and forestry.
Yeah, I understood, yeah. I just wanted to check if the setbacks are right. There was commentary there about the setbacks, and Councillor Rick made reference to the 100-metre scale on the can I get a better understanding of what that was all about, please, the setbacks on the plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are setback requirements for intensive animal industry. The 50 metres is required to any road. The proposal on the western boundary to the unconstructed road, let me just... there's a proposed shed within that location which reduces the boundary to 17 metres to that road. That was, again, an acceptable outcome of the planning scheme, and we looked at the performance outcome to determine whether there would be any impacts on any sensitive land use because of that encroachment to that setback. Because Bars Road is an unconstructed road, and then there's approximately 130 to 180 metre, approximately 200 metre forestry buffer to the Bruce Highway, it was concluded that there would be no impacts on any sensitive land use and that it was adequately screened from the Bruce Highway and that there would be no impacts.
Speak to you now, Mr. Mayor, if I may. Yep. Mr. Mayor, through you, to Councillor Rick Babarowski, your words today are very articulate and very much to the point, and I've never seen you so direct, if I might say, and I've never seen you use the 3 extensions of time either. So it's obviously very important to you in your division, and I understand that. I've been in a similar situation within my time in council where what's perceived to be, from myself, an overuse or a more intensive use of land was actually supported by this council. So I understand where you're going on this, and wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Prey. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion, as proposed by Councillor Babarowski, is one which I find somewhat surprising. When I say that, in one way, I'm not surprised about it because, Councillor, to his credit, Councillor Babarowski has, over recent years, talked about these large-scale sheds, etc., etc. Having said that, I'm a little bit surprised that he is so vocal in relation to this particular application. I have not got any contact, personal contact with the applicant, in my day-to-day affairs, nor with their agents, so I'd like everybody to understand that I speak as someone who doesn't have necessarily a conflict here. However, the applicant does have some sheds in my division, and as a councillor with Councillor Dixon, who's on the service excellence portfolio, one of our responsibilities is in the area of planning and development. So I've taken a particular interest in this particular application. I haven't visited the site because I know it very well, having travelled through that area a lot. Councillor Babarowski mentioned about comparison with a puppy farm. Well, you know, I don't really feel that that's a realistic comparison. Dogs are supposedly our best friend. We don't, to the best of my knowledge, eat them, whereas poultry are grown for food or for production of eggs, which is for food. And in this particular instance, it's for growing of poultry for chicken meat. Chicken meat is the most affordable protein product for the general population in Australia. It's certainly a lot cheaper than the other alternative meats. And it's growing rapidly. They wouldn't, I would think that, you know, this would be a fairly major investment, and I wouldn't think that they'd be proceeding down the line of expanding by a couple of 100,000 poultry in their sheds if there wasn't a demand there. I've done some research in relation to the company and their associated companies. They are, in my opinion, the largest agricultural employer in Division 1, and as such, growing of poultry has been something that has happened since the 1960s, firstly for Eat More Poultry and subsequently for other processes. And it's something that's been in the rural areas for, 60 odd years. And I think it's an important part of our agricultural production. I feel that if we refuse this application, we're sending a very bad message to industry and to the agricultural industry and the poultry industry in general. I'm noting that the department, the State Government Department of Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning were concurrent referral agency, and they approved the development. Many of Councillor Babarowski's objections relate to issues which are not able to be considered within our town plan. And that's regrettable, but that's the way it is. And on a purely town planning basis, I believe, with my somewhat reasonable knowledge of planning and planning court matters, that if we refuse this application and it goes to court, I just think we'll get a hiding, really, particularly when our planning officers are in favour of it, and secondly, when the state government has got no objection to it.
Do you need an extension?
Yes, please, just a short one.
Someone to move. Councillor Suarez, a seconder, please. Councillor Hungerford. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Carry on, Councillor.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that, there were no objections to this application, which is amazing, really. It is within the rural zone. Yes, it is within the interurban break. But, if you want to make sure that housing and all those sorts of things don't go into the interurban break, you need to have industries, rural industries other than pine trees, which is what we've basically got at present. We've got very little other rural industry in there, and there's pine trees everywhere. Pine trees are known to be a very sterile environment. Birds don't live there, animals don't live there. They may not necessarily be damaging the soil to a great degree, but they're actually worse for the environment than something like this is. And I think based on what the council officers have told us and the fact that You know, we do need this industry. I'm encouraging councillors to refuse this motion and also to adopt the recommendation of the officers.
Thank you. Are you foreshadowing that you would move the original officer recommendation? Okay, we'll come to that soon. Let me go to Councillor Suarez.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, I just have a few questions to begin with. John, if I may ask just a bit of understanding about the process. So, council's reviewed the application and the officers have put forward the recommendation. The state government have also had some involvement and supported it as well. But there are still two final checks for the state government for SARA to have a look at, and they are the environmental and stormwater matters. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it's partially correct. The state has to approve the environmental licence for the poultry farm itself. So that's all the environmental details associated with that. In terms of stormwater, the state has actually put conditions on, but we've also, as council, have put recommended conditions for them to implement a stormwater management plan as part of an operational works application.
So further to that, within our own team, did we have a look at, I know it's outside of council's remit, but did we have a look at any of the stormwater or environmental impacts that this application might have caused?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, our hydrologists had a look at the stormwater runoff. Our environmentalist looked at the buffers to the vegetation and to the stream orders. They have concluded that the proposed shed extension to the sheds is of sufficient distance to not impact on the waterway and wetlands. Our hydrologist has indicated a detention basin close to the proposed poultry shed extensions that will capture all roof water runoff.
Thank you. Another area that I'd like some clarification on is in the alternative motion, Councillor Babarowski's talked about agricultural land Class A and Class B. Just doing a quick Google search. Class A is cropland for a wide range of current and potential crops with nil to moderate limits to production, and Class B is limited cropland that is suitable for a narrow range of current and potential crops due to severe limitations, highly suitable for pasture. Now, you may or may not be able to answer this question for me. Has the current landowner ever used the balanced land for cropping?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I couldn't tell you that, answer that question.
Thank you. And the other argument that Councillor Babarowski put forward was the preservation of that land for cropping. Do we have any indication that the current landowner has any intentions to sell his property in the near future?
As far as I'm aware, there's no intention to sell the land. The extension to the existing poultry sheds is an indication that that land has been retained for poultry production.
Thank you. One final question, and I may reserve my right to speak should I feel the need to later on, Mr Mayor. And I put this question to Councillor Babarowski. There was a comparison made to the puppy farm, which I agree with Councillor Johnston. It's really not the same scenario. There was overwhelming opposition from our community. I support any councillor's right to bring an application to council, but usually it's based on community feedback. And as this application was every submission was in support, I'd just like to understand where from the community you have felt the need to bring this application to council. So if you want me to rephrase that, have you decided to bring this to council because of feedback from your community or because of your own moral views?
Look, thanks for the question. I think that the timing of the application didn't help the community to be aware of this. So I suspect that they simply weren't aware. They didn't pay attention to this when it was out for submissions. There were, interestingly, 138 submissions in support, which I think suggests they might have anticipated a larger response, but it was just missed. I have no doubt at all that there is a strong proportion of the community who feel very strongly about extensions or expansions or new poultry farm or intensive animal keeping or intensive animal industry. So I'm representing them because that's what I believe. And I'm doing my best to highlight to this chamber that a lot of the arguments that have been made up to this point, to some extent, aren't as well informed as they should be. We are now much better informed on potential environmental health risks, environmental and health risks. And I've essentially attempted to highlight those arguments to you, which certainly I share. So is it a moral position? I'd suggest partially, yes. And to some extent, I'd remind all of the councillors in making the comparisons to the puppy farm, how strongly, and look, I urge you to re-listen, review the footage, which you can do, and I did yesterday. Many of you presented your first argument as being one based on moral grounds, and you strongly argued that it was council's duty to challenge the officer recommendation in that case,
Councillor,
which was basically scale and intensity.
I'd just ask you, I think you've answered.
Okay, I think I've
Councillor
answered.
Suarez's question. We won't labour the point.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. You're done. Councillor Hungerford.
And I put this respectfully, a very good argument there and passionate, and I respect your view on there. I won't be able to support this today, and I'll explain why. We're looking at an application here for an existing use that's been in place for 20 years. That has existing use rights. This is an expansion of that use. From 4 sheds, adding 6 sheds to 10 sheds. Now the proposed extensions would maintain the existing lawfully operating use on site, being a poultry farm, intensive animal husband industry. And that falls within the rural activity group pursuant to the definitions in a Sunshine Coast Planning Scheme 2014. So it's very straightforward to me. The proposed use is a potentially consistent use in a rural zone, and the Rural Uses Code is applicable. The proposed sheds have been located as close to the existing development footprint as possible to minimise any potential impacts. The proposal achieves adequate setbacks from road frontage, site boundaries, nearby residential uses, waterways and/or wetlands, and as such it is considered the site is appropriately sized to accommodate the extensions and satisfies the performance of the outcome of the code. Now the extensions are also suitably distanced and entirely outside of the wetland area at the rear of the site. Existing vegetation on site will be retained, would not be impacted as part of the proposal. The new sheds are on already cleared land, so there's no clearing either. The assessment of the proposal finds the matters relating to noise, dust, odour, air quality and traffic would not have a detrimental impact on the Beerbraham residential area, located 3.2 kilometres to the west, and as was explained before, forestry in between, a highway, there's quite a lot of other uses there in between that township. This is predominantly due to the separation distance between the uses. It is also noted that there are existing poultry farms and poultry farms under construction that are located between the development site and Beerbraham. So we've already got approvals there, we've already got existing uses happening in the same area, the same uses. Now for us to refuse something, they must relate to town planning in some way, so they've got to be solely town planning matters. And they've got to be substantive. Otherwise we're wasting our time and the courts will only view things on the substantive planning matters. So saying that, animal welfare are not planning related. Rather, they're administered through other forms of legislation. Now, in this case, the operations for poultry farms in Queensland are regulated by the state government. Poultry farms are administered and regulated by the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. And I see that the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, who are referred through SARA, are referred as the concurrent agency referral, and though in this instance for this application. And on the 16th of March, SARA provided its concurrence agency response, which recommended approval with conditions. So that's their response. Our planners can then only go on with the planning matters involved in this case. So respectfully, when I look at the reasons for refusal here, I do not see substantive planning grounds there to lodge a strong case for knocking this application back. So respectfully, I will not be supporting the refusal motion. And I'm happy to second the officer's recommendation that Winston intends to move. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Law.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. A couple of questions, if I may, to start with. On planning grounds, if I may, John, if the owner wanted to turn this to arable cropping, would they have to protect the wetland that's there, or would they simply be able to clear the land and put it all to arable?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think that that land being a wetland is protected and that vegetation is protected. They would have to make application for vegetation clearing, and it depends on the classification of the vegetation in that area for any clearing. It may not be possible, if, like for example, if it's koala habitat or things like that.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up question to that: what would be the space available on the 2 blocks of land if it was put to arable use? So it was planted out to crops, having removed all of the sheds that currently exist. What's the land area, is my question.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the total area of both sites is 31 hectares. Where the existing poultry farm is approximately 17 hectares. That's pretty much on the cleared portion of the site. So one's looking at about 17 plus, between 17 and 20 hectares or less.
Okay, and that would exclude the wetlands in that total?
That is correct.
Thank you. If I could ask just a far more straightforward question, and acknowledging that the community may not have been aware of the application, I suspect they're aware of it now, given the journey that we've been on. How many people have approached you to not allow this proposal to go ahead from your constituents? The question to Councillor Rick.
The answer is none.
Thank you. We've also mentioned the other recent matter that came to us around the puppy farm. I believe it was impact accessible. And I also understand that we had, and I'll look for correction here, Mr Mayor, but it's something like 45,000 people contact us in opposition to that development application. So could I just get a correction on, was it 45,000 or 4,500? It was a big number. Oh, 400,000, you think? Okay, so, yeah, so many more than none is the point. Okay, thank you. The other question I have, again, if I may, Mr Mayor, is to Councillor Rick. You're often telling us about the global population explosion, particularly since the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution, and farming and the intensification and mechanisation of farming to support what is now over 8 billion people on the planet. If we don't allow intensive farming to occur, how will we feed the population? Mm-hmm.
Very good question. Look, the answer is, and it was suggested that this is the most affordable form of protein of the meats. It is not, I would suggest, the most affordable form of protein of all foods which are plant-based. So the answer is that you would simply switch this particular activity of intensive animal industry to another form of cropping or plant-based farming, and that would feed the population. And whilst I haven't done more recent research specifically this to give you an easy answer on that, I'm confident that we can feed not only the 8 billion that exists now, but the 9, the 10, and probably the 10.5 billion that will be there before the end of the century. This is not the answer. Intensive animal industry is not the way forward.
Thank you. I'd be inclined to agree with your answer, but the issue is not your argument. The issue is changing people's behaviour to wish to do that. And at the moment, I see no evidence that as a population locally or globally, there is any indication that we are moving towards a plant-based diet. I don't see that happening. And as we've heard already, it's not a relevant planning scheme matter to be able to refuse this. My final question before I may speak to the motion is perhaps, I'm not sure if this is for John or it may be someone else, how defendable is this refusal should it go to a planning and environment court, given I would assume the owner would appeal the decision. There are 138 people who would have appeal rights. How defendable is this, and what might be the cost to council in attempting to defend this?
Deborah, would you answer that, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Law, through you, Mr Mayor. An appeal in the Planning and Environment Court is an appeal or a hearing in new, so it's heard all over again. What will be taken into consideration is obviously Council's decision, and also part of the information will be the officer's report. We can't determine what the costs might be because it would be, we imagine, significant. I can't give you a figure because we would need to have all of the experts. There would be joint experts needed to be called by council on all the matters you've heard about today. So all the matters we've already spoken, that John's already spoken to and attested to today. So I can't give you a figure on costs, but it is a hearing in new.
Thank you. I think I'll speak to the motion briefly, appreciate you putting forward the arguments, and I'm inclined to agree with you on there are much better ways to feed our population locally and globally, but I think at the moment, and if I think about the current cost of living crisis that we're in, people have significantly and very obviously, if we go to the shops, have turned to purchasing eggs for their protein because it's cheaper, and are eating a lot more chicken because it's cheaper. Yes, there are other ways of getting all of our dietary needs met, but at the moment, most people use this type of product because that's what's being supported. I'm struggling to see good planning reasons not to do this. I have the view that intensive farming, horticulture, agriculture is the way that we will feed our people, whether that's through meat or protein plant-based products. It will require intensive industrial-like farming to occur. Vertical farming to provide green plant-based food is the intensive version of doing this, but for plants. So just something to consider. Would you be opposing intensive agriculture that is growing plant-based products? You may choose to answer that if you close on this. So, you know, there's many complex arguments there, but this has been done in this way since 2000. It's expanding an existing site, and the remaining 17 hectares that could be put to arable use is simply not viable. There would be no grower who would plant this out to arable cropping because it's simply too small. When you look at arable cropping, it is, in this country at least, it is huge areas of land that are put under arable. In the UK, in intensive farming, you might actually use this for arable, but even then it would most likely be grass for cattle and dairy farming. This is not where you grow arable crops. It's too small. And it's surrounded by the forestry, which would likely make the quality of the product quite poor. So, can't support it. We need to feed the population. This is a way of providing cost-effective options for people. So I think we have to enable this expansion to occur on a site that's already existing.
Thank you, Councillor Law. A question, Councillor Cox?
Just with your indulgence, Mr Mayor, I realised that during my earlier address, I addressed Mr Borthwick by his first name, so I was just wanting to apologise for that. It was a bit unprofessional of me, sorry.
Thank you. Very decent of you, Councillor. Councillor Landsberg.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I also won't be supporting Councillor Rick's alternative motion. I did raise a couple of questions in relation to stormwater, which I was concerned about during the agenda review. That was obviously well explained with the new detention basin that's going to be built next to the new buildings. One thing I just want to touch on is our arguments that, and look, I really appreciate the extensive conversations going on to and for here, but one of the issues around the animal welfare that we drove regarding the puppy farm was the changes in the Victorian legislation that was actually gave us the actual grounds to really oppose that puppy farm, as well as support with RSPCA as well. Look, this report is extensive and I've read through it. I support, obviously, the officer's recommendations. I may speak to that after we deal with this. But getting back to the strategic outcomes of this report, it really meets the criteria. And as a performance-based planning scheme, we really have to recognise the benefits of expansion for this facility, especially with economic development. It touches on being well located and it designed rural enterprises that provide business and employment opportunities, including agribusiness. And as well as one of our high valued industries, this is actually continues to get our support across council. And the strategic outcomes for use of rural lands in the existing areas, as this obviously falls within the potential consistent use, but as a consistent operating business for over 20 years, it's hard to argue. And I would feel that we would be wasting ratepayers' money arguing this in a planning court, which has already been spoken to by a fellow councillor in the room there. So I won't be supporting Councillor Rick's alternative motion, and I'll wait for the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Landsberg. I'll just add a few comments that I think are relevant. Rural industries, agriculture, as Councillor Landsberg has just indicated, is identified as one of our 7 high-value industries. It's worth $900 million to our economy, and that sustains a lot of our community. Woodlands Farms, who are the proponent, are the largest poultry and egg producers in Queensland. Of interest is I this week opened a new facility in the industrial park at Caloundra that, amongst other things, produces banana bread and pavlovas, most pavlovas in the southern hemisphere. They consume 40 million eggs a year. And whilst I don't know the direct connection between the production of those eggs and their use in those pavlovas, I can only assume there's a meeting there somewhere. Once upon a time, those bananas would have all been grown here as well, but today they're grown in far north Queensland. I was at the Nambour show on Friday night talking to rural producers on the Sunshine Coast who are forever fearful of the encroaching population growth overcoming their enterprise, which we accept by highlighting the importance of rural industries as one of our agribusiness, as one of our 7 high-value industries, is important. Is there a better place for this sort of facility than in the interurban break? I doubt it. I think that's the perfect location. And council, as I said earlier to Councillor O'Prey, has always supported the notion that whilst we don't want to see brick and tile roofs over that area we identify as the interurban break, we do want to protect the existing use rights. If the forestry, HQ plantations, was to pack up and leave, we would have a dreadful moonscape to deal with. That would be a real challenge for the future. The same applies to these agricultural pursuits. Once upon a time, we would have also produced the sugar for those banana bread and pavlova products, but we don't anymore. That comes from somewhere else. So it's always a very fine balance, and I appreciate Councillor Babarowski's position on this, but the sustainability around, and I think, if I didn't mention, I should have mentioned, I think Woodlands employ 800 people. That would make them, I think, the biggest agricultural employer on the coast, and indeed one of the biggest employers. We tend to be very much driven by smaller enterprises. So I think, given the position that's been presented by John and the officer recommendation and the limit or no opposition, I think that this proposal should be supported. Sorry, I'll just adjust that for absolute clarity. I would suggest that Councillor Babarowski's proposal not be supported, and that, yep. So on that note, I will hand back to Councillor Babarowski to give us his wrapping up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, if I may, first before I close. Is that okay?
Yes.
So, Mr Borthwick, can I just ask you a question about the bioretention basins that are, as I believe, are proposed to be situated between the new sheds and the wetland, as shown in the reports? Is that correct?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the proposed biodetention basin is shown on the plan in the detailed report of Appendix A, I think it is, or sorry, it's Attachment 1, the detailed report. There's a picture of the proposed biodetention basin on page 43 of 263.
Would you mind bringing that up, please?
Which is between the existing poultry sheds and the wetlands, as indicated on that. Okay. Which is the wetlands are actually further to the north. That is a local dam. That's the start of the stream order 1. The wetland is to the north, far north of the site.
I wanted to make that illustration clear to you because even though, by definition, they are not part of the formal wetlands, it is part of the watercourse. The dam is actually on the end of the watercourse and is directly connected into the wetlands. So what happens in that dam happens to the wetlands. And my suggestion is, if you look at that, how tightly constrained that is by the new sheds, and how close it is to the dam / start of the wetlands or watercourses. Could you tell me whether that would be guaranteed not to overtop in a severe deluge event?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I can't provide that guarantee. It's just the stormwater runoff from the roof structure. It would be designed to cater for that.
Thank you. I knew that was the answer, John. Mr Borthwick, and I apologise to put you in that situation. I just wanted to illustrate the point that these pieces of infrastructure can only be designed to reasonable standards. My belief is that it would be reasonable to conclude that in a serious deluge event that would overtop and take its contents into the adjoining dam watercourses. The proximity is way too close. Having asked that question, let me ask you another question. In this land is in the interurban break, and we've heard a number of people talk about how important that is. Regardless of whether this extension goes ahead, does rural zoning protect it from the principal purposes of an urban break by precluding residential and rural residential development anyway.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it does. It actually is protected through the rural zone, but it's also protected through the South East Queensland Regional Plan, the Regional Landscape and Rural Production Area, which pretty much prohibits any residential development or rural residential development or further fragmentation of the land if it's not 100 hectares or less.
Thank you. I wanted to make that point because it's already protected. This does not enhance the protection. This diminishes the protection. As the Mayor made the point, we don't want to see brick and tile roofs. They're not going to be brick and tile. They're just going to be tin sheds. Built form is what you're going to get, that you're trying to avoid in the urban rake. But you are going to get built form. If you choose to refuse this application, you won't. If I may, I'll continue on to my close. I'll try and address a couple of the points. Remind yourselves that I'm not challenging through this motion the existing use. The existing use can continue. In fact, if you were to refuse this application, it's quite possible that the applicant would reconsider the scope and scale and the intensity and reapply, more suitable to the size of this site and its location. But that's speculative and I don't know. But councillors, as with the puppy farm, the assessment officer's jobs are to interpret the planning scheme narrowly and technically. And again, I encourage you all to listen back to what you said in that application. You all gave yourselves the right to challenge the planning codes and the officer's recommendation in that refusal. And we as councillors have to be able to make a broader, more strategic and socially responsible evaluation in line with our overarching vision. Because if we don't translate our vision into planning decisions, why should anyone else? Approving this intensification could dramatically increase our region's potential biohazard risks. It wouldn't necessarily be the exact chickens bred in this facility, but with a greater number of poultry workers, live transports and suppliers in a network of around 200 poultry farms in the state, as they move from site to site, region to region, more opportunities exist for something to go wrong. If approved, how does even more intensive poultry farming not lead to even more intensive poultry farming, and then even more intensive horticulture? And finally, an unrecognisable rural landscape where factories replace fields and pitiless spreadsheets replace human sensibilities. We've heard today how easily seduced you are by the economic arguments. Today, you have a choice to decide this isn't for us. Our community moved here for a better balance with nature. Let's send the strongest possible message, the right message, Councillor Johnston, through our development assessments that we are committed to our vision and will back ourselves in our interpretation of our region's planning scheme as we reset our informed opposition to industrial farming as we review and prepare the next. Councillors, the Mayor spoke earlier on about servant leadership. This is a definitive example of where that can apply. This intensification is not a good outcome for our region. I urge you all to show that service to the greater good and leadership is what's needed here and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Babarowski's motion? Councillor O'Prey and Councillor Babarowski. Those opposed? Councillor Cox, Johnston, Hungerford, Suarez, Law, Jamieson and Landsberg. The motion's defeated. I'll revert back to Councillor Johnston, who indicated you would move the officer recommendation as a motion, seconded by Councillor Hungerford. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr Mayor. I move the officer's recommendation, and as we discussed the issue extensively, I'd like to reserve my right to speak later if there is considerable opposition.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Looks like everyone feels as though it's been well and truly dealt with. Would you like to close, councillor, before we vote?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, but I don't think it's necessary. Thank you.
Okay. We'll put the officer recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Cox, Councillor Johnston, Hungerford, Suarez, Law, Jamieson and Landsberg. Those opposed? Councillor Babarowski and Councillor O'Prey. The motion's carried. Let's move on. Thank you to the officers, John and Danny. Good effort. Let's go to the next item on our agenda, which is the 8.2, the application of national competition policy. I want to invite Ben Vandenberg and Simon Crop to give us a presentation. And would someone collect Councillor Natoli and let him know that he's free to return? It is a bit warm, isn't it? Yeah, no, it is a bit warm. Lovely winter sun, but a bit, bit warm. Rightio, thanks Ben and Simon. We'll just pause for a moment while our guests leave. Thank you. Okay, we're in your hands. Ben?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, councillors. The report before you today relates to the application of the National Competition Policy for the 23-24 financial year. The application of the NCP is presented on an annual basis. This slide just briefly sets out what I'll be covering today and the outcome being sought. We have a look at what the competitive neutrality principle says. Competitive neutrality requires that an entity conducting a business activity in competition with the private sector should not enjoy a net advantage over its competitors only because it is a public sector entity. So what we are doing is attempting to ensure in our application of the NCP that we do not enjoy a net benefit. If we have a look at the legislation, firstly, we must consider whether or not the activity we are looking at is a business activity. In order for it to be a business activity, council needs to trade in the goods or services of that activity. For those activities that we consider to be business activity, we then move on to a threshold test. There are two thresholds to consider here. If the annual expenditure is greater than 9.7 million, it is considered to be a significant business activity. Activities below the $9.7 million threshold, but above $340,000, are considered a prescribed business activity. Council then needs to consider how it will apply the NCP to these activities. For new business activities, or considering annually each significant business activity, we must consider, if it's new, the public benefit assessment. If it's being reviewed, as we are now, we apply the competitive neutrality principle, which can be done via full cost pricing, commercialisation or corporatisation. In ensuring that we don't enjoy a benefit, we need to charge for the goods or services at the full cost of providing these goods or services. In terms of prescribed business activities, which are those activities where costs are greater than 340 but less than 9.7 million, we need to consider firstly whether or not we apply the Code of Competitive Conduct. The Code of Competitive Conduct involves the application of competitive neutrality principles, including adjustments to take account of the advantages and disadvantages of local government ownership. The Code is intended to be a less onerous way for smaller business activities to comply with the competitive neutrality principles. If we don't apply the Code, and we haven't for a number of activities, then we need to resolve to do that, and we need to state the reasons why we aren't applying the Code. In dealing with our significant business activities and our prescribed business activities, it is put to you that we meet the obligations of the legislation for the significant business activity of waste and resource management by applying full cost pricing. For the 4 prescribed business activities identified here on the screen, we meet the obligations by corporatisation for Sun Central Maroochydore and Caloundra Event Centre, and through the application of the Code of Competitive Conduct to Sunshine Coast Holiday Parks and the quarries. For those that we are proposing not to apply the Code of Competitive Conduct, they are listed there on the screen. The reasons for not applying the code to these activities are contained within the report. There are also a number of activities which are regulatory or policy-based, which we have assessed as non-business activities and therefore not subject to NCP. Prices in terms of fees and charges for most of these are set, and there isn't any competition in this space. As mentioned previously, if we don't apply the code, we must document the reasons as to why we are not applying the code. This slide is just an example of the information that you can find in the report in relation to that. Appendix A provides the justification for not applying the code to the activities that we've listed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or someone to move, sorry, to start with? Councillor Hungerford, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Natoli, thank you. You'd like to open, Councillor Hungerford?
Through you, Mr Mayor. I'll be brief because you've gone through it pretty detailed there, so I'll just be very light on. Now, Council must consider and resolve this for the National Competition Policy on an annual basis. That is to comply with the Local Government Act 2009. Now, as is stated before, under this principle, an entity, in this case being council, that is conducting a business activity in competition with the private sector should not have an advantage over the competitors just because we're a public sector. So it's pretty straightforward thing there. And in the resolution, you can see the ones that it's applied to and the ones that it is not applying to, and the reasons for that are in the appendix for those that it doesn't apply to and the reasons why. Now, this is reported in our annual budget, which we just passed this morning. And it's also in Council's annual report. Now, the annual report to Council must include information relating to the identification and performance of business activities. This information is contained in the body of the financial statements in line with legislative requirements. We do this on an annual basis, which in turn are published as part of our annual report, which we publish every year. It's all there. This is also the financial statements and annual report of Council are audited by the Auditor General and are contained in the audit report. Remembering we've had 14 unmodified audits in a row, so we must be getting things right. And I'm going to be very provocative here. I want to see number 15 at the end of this year. But it's just normal business. We do it very well and competently, and we apply this very well. We haven't been questioned on it at all by the Auditor General's department. So I'd say your department, I congratulate you, the department's getting this very correct. I'll put it to your councillors, this is very straightforward.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. There are no further speakers. Do you need to close, Councillor? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks very much, gentlemen. You're going to give us the next presentation. Sorry, 8.3 is the Procurement Policy and Procurement and Disposal Framework. And again, a presentation from Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. This report relates to the adoption of the 2023-24 Procurement Policy and Procurement Disposal Framework. Much like the NCP, the Procurement Policy and Procurement Disposal Framework are considered annually. Our framework is set up through the Local Government Act and Regulation. These place an obligation on us to comply with the sound contracting principles when conducting procurement activities. It also requires us to produce, maintain and review annually a number of documents that form our framework. These are the Procurement Policy, and under the Strategic Contracting Provisions, the Contract Manual, which is our how-to guide, and then a contracting plan which looks at what we will be procuring in the coming financial year. We're proposing a number of changes from the 22-23 framework. the most significant of which are on the screen there now. I'll go into each of these in a bit more detail. However, briefly, they are changes to our procurement thresholds, changes to evaluation criteria and weighting, in particular how we evaluate workplace health and safety, how we evaluate price and social and economic factors, some minor changes relating to conflicts of interest, and changes to the adoption of significant contracting plans. Looking at each of these in a bit more detail, firstly the procurement thresholds. Our procurement thresholds determine our route to market for procurement activities based on the anticipated value of the resulting contract. Currently our thresholds are, for activities up to 25,000, we require 1 quote. For activities greater than 25,000 but less than 250, we require a minimum of 3 quotes. For activities greater than 250,000, they go to public tender. There are some exceptions to these, but generally that's how the thresholds are applied. Over the past 12 months, we have continued to see price increases for our goods and services, which have resulted in activities which could be procured via quote 1, moving into quote 3 value, and activities which could be procured via quote 3, now requiring a public tender. In response to these changes, which we are still experiencing and our market assessment tells us we are likely to continue to experience, we are proposing a lift in the quote 1 threshold to $50,000 and a lift in the quote 3 threshold to $500,000 to better align with current market movements. Importantly, as part of increasing the thresholds, we will be moving the requirement to invite locals up to $500,000 in line with the quote 3 threshold. Currently, when we conduct quote invite-only processes, which are those where we actually invite the respondents as opposed to a public tender, it is a requirement that we invite locals only. With the increase to the quote 3 threshold, we are lifting that requirement for locals only to procurements up to $500,000, which will increase the number of procurements that locals only will be invited to respond to. So this is just a visual representation of the thresholds that we're proposing, highlighting each of the relevant thresholds and the routes to market for those values. In continually considering how we can be improving our process and systems, we have taken a close look at how we actually evaluate submissions. Our current process sees responses evaluated across a combination of non-price and price criteria, each of which has a weighting that aligns with the relevant importance of that criteria to the particular procurement activity. Workplace health and safety is currently one of our non-price evaluation criteria and forms part of a respondent's methodology response. As it is only one of the criteria that forms part of a respondent's overall non-price score, a poor safety response can be overcome, in some cases, by good performance in other areas. We are proposing to move workplace health and safety from its place within the methodology submission to a standalone criteria, which will be assessed on the basis of satisfactory or unsatisfactory. Submissions assessed as unsatisfactory will be disqualified from further evaluation. This is a more appropriate method of ensuring that we consider safety with all our contracting activities in helping to ensure that we are engaging contractors and suppliers with appropriate systems and safety performance. As I just mentioned, price is currently a weighted evaluation criteria. Price obviously is and always will be a very important component of our evaluation process. Currently, price will generally be, if not always, the highest weighted criteria. This impacts the weighting left available for non-price and leaves little room to accommodate emerging requirements such as environment and sustainability. Additionally, it makes distinguishing between respondents sometimes difficult due to relatively low weightings. Moving price to a non-weighted criteria will allow for a 3-stage approach to our tender evaluation, with stage 1 being assessment of mandatory criteria, which will be things like licences, insurances and workplace health and safety. Respondents who do not meet these criteria will not progress further in the evaluation process. Stage 2 will be an assessment of all the non-price criteria, the result of which will be an overall score for non-price. Stage 3 will then introduce price in order to determine value for money. Social and economic factors continue to be an important part of our evaluation process. We have a minimum of 20% available to be applied across local, social and First Nations. In deciding how the 20% is apportioned across the three criteria, we need to consider the market being approached in order to identify opportunities for First Nations and social benefit engagement. This consideration should not simply be restricted to whether or not a First Nations or social benefit business could respond, but also whether or not there is opportunity for involvement in the supply chain for the goods or services that we are seeking. If we can identify that First Nations or social benefit providers could respond, we can increase the weighting in order to pursue that opportunity. We're not proposing any changes to the weighting currently applied for social and economic factors. The difference for the coming financial year will be greater consideration of the role that First Nations businesses and social benefit providers could play in the delivery of the goods or services, and the inclusion of an appropriate weighting alongside local within the 20% that reflects that opportunity. In relation to managing conflicts of interest identified during our procurement activity, there is no substantial change other than ensuring we align with the corporate governance policies in relation to declaring conflicts of interest. Currently, our contracting plan requires us to identify all significant contracts, then prepare and have Council adopt a significant contracting plan for each. This has been Council's treatment of significant contracts since adoption of the strategic contracting procedures. We have identified significant contracts as contracts that have an anticipated value of 5 million or more and or are deemed significant contracts following a risk assessment. The regulation requires Council to make and adopt a contracting plan each financial year, and that contracting plan must include the contracts that Council considers will be a significant contract, having consideration for the definition that we apply. The contracting plan must also include a policy about the making of a significant contracting plan. Following adoption of the contracting plan, the regulation only requires that Council make a significant contracting plan for each significant contract before the contract starts. The change that we are proposing is to not have each individual SCP adopted by Council. Rather, they will be approved by the CEO following endorsement by the manager of the branch seeking the significant contract and their group executive. This change will allow for the significant contracting plan for each significant contract to be prepared and approved closer to the commencement of the contract, with the contracting plan to then be better informed of the contract that it relates to. Council will continue to be made aware of all significant contracts through their identification within the contracting plan that is required to be adopted annually. These next two slides highlight the contracts that have been identified as significant contracts to be entered into in the next financial year. All the contracts here have been identified on the basis that their anticipated value will be greater than 5 million. This is the largest number that we have identified as significant since we adopted the strategic contracting provisions. Environment sustainability continues to be an important aspect of our procurement activities. Under an evaluation methodology that contains a substantial percentage for price, it is challenging to assign weightings to all criteria that reflect their importance. Environment sustainability is one area that will benefit from removal of price as a weighted criteria, as it will allow us to increase the weighting for this important area. In addition to our processes for the coming financial year, will be our engagement with Giveable to assist with validation of supply sustainability performance and practices. This is an important change for us to validate what respondents are doing and will help Council identify those companies which align with Council's sustainability goals. Giveable are focused on assisting organisations through the provision of data with procurement decisions that help to drive a low carbon economy through the supply chain. This is important in managing our Scope 3 emissions, which are indirect emissions released in other parts of the supply chain not controlled by Council and make up a significant portion of greenhouse gas emissions. Giveable have received funding from Queensland's Low Carbon Accelerator program as an innovative solution assisting organisations to reach emissions targets. As a result of this funding, Council is receiving a 50% subsidy for the first 12 months of this program. looking at some of the 22-23 stats to see what the local preference and procurement guideline is achieving. To the end of April, we had a procurement activity spend of 361 million, with 252 million of that with local suppliers, which represents 70% of our spend. Highlighting a few things we're looking at during the coming financial year. I've mentioned some stuff already in relation to workplace health and safety, a very important area for council, and we continue to work closely with the people and culture to achieve improvements here. The move of workplace health and safety to satisfactory, unsatisfactory is part of this work. Also conducting a procurement review to help identify areas for improvement, and we will investigate new models and methods that deliver improved outcomes and reduce costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Someone move the recommendation. Councillor O'Prey, thank you. A seconder, please. Councillor Babarowski. Would you like to open, Councillor O'Prey?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I will. Thank you through you. Thank you for your presentation and all the questions that I've asked you in our meetings. It's been a really important part of our council processes, and I also would like to thank Paul Skillen as well. Thank you for all your advice. Mr Mayor, there's only really 3 points that I wanted to draw the attention out of this report, and that's the change in the procurement thresholds. As already stated, that the one quote thresholds are now shifting from $25,000 to $50,000. It's pretty much a no-brainer in my book. I think most of our work doesn't even come in under $25,000 anymore. And the 3 quote thresholds are now shifting from between $25,000 to $250,000 now to $50,000 to $500,000. Now, we need to be very aware that in this threshold request for tenders, we don't get a lot of tenders actually applying, and it's concerning. And as I've mentioned at this chamber before, I think we need to try and work out a way to try and make it very simple and easy and streamlined so that the locals can actually have a really good go at it, and we can try and attract and encourage more tenders to our process. The other one that I wanted to draw attention to is the workplace health and safety element and the methodologies particularly. It's a standalone criteria now, which is somewhat different, and I think that's it's the way of the world. It's the way the world is. We're moving forward, and workplace health and safety, as we're all very aware, is a very important part of council's procedures. So I applaud that. The price, I just want to really reiterate the fact that price is still our most highly weighted and considered element of a tender process. I mean, we can have all the other elements of all, but if they're $5 million above whatever else is going, it's not going to win the tender. So it's really important that we just reiterate the fact that price is still the #1 heavily weighted element. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Prey. Councillor Babarowski.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I rise to really just point out that I really think this is a really well thought through and intelligent new policy framework for this council. As you heard, it recognises that the thresholds needed to change. And I perhaps have a couple of questions, one to the officer, which is, you've already stated how well we do with local procurement, about 70% of our spend. Would you expect that percentage to increase should this new policy framework be approved today?
Through you, Mr Mayor, certainly I think there is opportunity for that in increasing the threshold in only inviting locals up to 500. You know, we are moving the bar by 250,000 in that respect. So I definitely think that increases the opportunities, most definitely.
Lovely, thank you. I think everybody in this chamber would probably applaud this move to a greater weighting to local procurement and local suppliers. But the other thing I'm really interested in is the productivity of our staff. Having been an officer, and Councillor Ted would probably join me, the amount of energy that you put into even a low-level procurement is often the same as a higher level. So perhaps either a question to the CEO or the GE, would we expect the productivity of our staff to improve in the procurement process, having moved the threshold from 25 to 50,000, which represents, and you may want to comment on it, the vast volume of the procurement that council's engaged with? It's not the value, but the quantum.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for that question, Councillor. I think the team have presented that it would absolutely increase the productivity of them to be able to simplify our procurement for those elements. I mean, as we know, we don't know that there's going to be really big shifts in numbers between these categories. because part of the reasoning behind it is that we've had a price rise. So we probably expect vastly the same sort of quantum in each category. But I think that there will be some evidence that we'll see some of those categories incorporate a little bit more of the procurement, and that should make it much simpler for the staff and hopefully simpler for the businesses that apply for doing jobs within council. So the idea is to have, in its simplification, an increase in productivity across the whole system, not just for council officers, but for people who are applying for doing work with council as well.
Thank you very much for that answer. I just wanted to perhaps conclude with, again, reassuring the community that this in no way means that there won't be tremendous oversight built into the process. So rest assured that there would be very careful processes to ensure that we get maximum value out of every procurement. So in conclusion, well done on the design of this new policy and its framework. And to any councillor portfolio councillors involved, again, congratulations. This is a good shift, which probably looks much like bureaucracy, but actually is a really quite important change in the way that we procure our goods and services. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. Councillor Law.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, I have a question, if I may, that also relates back to the previous item on the national competition policy, in that we've assigned that we have a code of competitive conduct for quarries and caravan parks and holiday parks. But while I like the changes in the procurement policy, how does the procurement policy apply when we're also at the same time applying the code of competitive conduct, when the bureaucracy of the procurement policy actually gives us an arguable disadvantage on how slowly we react compared to a commercial competitor who doesn't have to go through such a rigorous, even though it's much better, such a rigorous procurement process? Is the one thing defeating the other?
Through the chair, I'm not sure how to tie those two things together in terms of the procurement activities and the NCP, or whether having to undertake a procurement activities for these processes disadvantages us at all. It's probably a less flexible process or procedure than private have to go through, but I would like to think that in conducting procurement activities we get a competitive result. I know that the holiday parks are keenly sought after whenever we put those out to tender, and we do actually get competitive responses in that place. So I understand that the process itself is probably far more rigid and less flexible than private, but I think we still get a competitive outcome from those activities, if I've answered your question correctly.
Probably not, but maybe we need to have a discussion outside of this meeting to really work through the intent of my question, which is around, because we have to go through a procurement process, the main issue we have is time.
Councillor Law, I'm going to throw to Mr Liberty, who I think can answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Through you, Mr Chair, while this won't directly address the issue of how much time it takes to go through a process that we need to do for transparency reasons, obviously, there is a mechanism called community service obligations that we can use in relation to our business units. Now, an easy example is that at one point, and the gap has closed, but at one point there was a significant difference between superannuation that a commercial business paid versus what we were mandated to pay under legislation. So there was an adjustment that was allowed. So it doesn't address the time one, but the mechanism that we can look at for the quarry or some of those other businesses are those community service obligations.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, and I will be supporting the new procurement policies for the benefits of our, specifically around trying to keep the money and keep the economy local. I think that's absolutely essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Law. There are no further speakers, so I'll go back to Councillor O'Prey to close. Not necessary. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks very much, Ben. Councillors, I'm going to suggest we do one more item. Our finance team have been incredibly busy finalising the budget, and they'd be keen to get this last little bit out of the way. So we will fast a little longer. We will fast a little longer so that Michael and Isaac can get their presentation done.
Post-budget review.
Over to you, Isaac.
Thank you. It's much appreciated. Good afternoon, all. Here to present the May 2023 Financial Performance Report. So, councillors, at the end of May, the operating result was $47.2 million, which is below our current budget by $4.5 million. There's variances consisting of $4.8 million above in terms of revenue, and expenses above budget of 9.3, of which 4.9 relate to accounting treatment in our capital works program. Some of the highlights, similar to previous months, we're still receiving unbudgeted operating grants for the disasters from last financial year, and our return on investments are still going quite well, tracking higher than the budget we set back in February. Employee costs are under budget due to continued vacancies throughout the organisation, and in terms of our materials and services, we have catered for the impacts of inflation in terms of service delivery areas. Our capital works program is 68.2% complete, total expenditure of $199.7 million. The core program, which is our core infrastructure program, is 74.6%. We're aiming for an 85% completion at the end of this month. In terms of our cash and our borrowings, so our cash at the end of the month was $308.5 million, and our borrowings were still unchanged at $457 million. Our proposed borrowings for this year were $34.2 million. Our actual borrowings, which were enacted in the month of June, will be $6.2 million. We did review the borrowings required for this financial year and reduce that amount required. The impact of that will be shown in the next monthly report. In terms of our investments, we have 14 term deposits totaling $150 million. They range between 0 and 365 days, and we're getting an average weighted return of 4.52%. And the recommendation today, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Isaac. Someone to move? Councillor Hungerford, thank you. Have a second. Councillor Natoli, thank you. Would you like to open, Councillor?
With pleasure. Again, it's another excellent report. It's the same every month. Isaac's covered most of the points there, but I'll just go through a few of the key ones. We have a positive operating result of $47 million. The end of year operating result of $18.5 million. $147 million of capital revenue and non-current expenses. So that's $9 million, improved position of $9 million, which is excellent. As of 31st of May, $517.6 million operating revenue has been achieved. That's $4.8 million more than the current budget. As of 31st of May, $199.7 million, or 68.2% of Council's $292.9 million capital works program has been financially expended, so we're well on target for delivering this year. And the core capital program has progressed 74.6% of budget and actual spend of $156.9 million. Of course, we've got the end of year result will come in next month, so we'll be able to finalise those. Council's $23 million road resurfacing and rehabilitation program has progressed 92%, with a total expenditure of $21 million. Our $2.3 million bus stop program has progressed 104%, with a total expenditure of $2.4 million, so they're completely expended. And on the cash balance side of things, very healthy position, $308.5 million excluding trust funds, and Council's debt, like I've said this morning, have we been running it down for years now because we've been getting our debt down for sound financial management, stands at $457 million. And if you look at the charts on our cash balances, we're looking really healthy, so I'm very happy. And it puts us in good stead for the next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. There are no further speakers, so you don't need to close, Ted. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Isaac and Michael. It's 1:22. I think we'll take a break for 25 minutes. Please, if you can be back at 1:47. Let's get back into it. We're up to item 8.5, the Audit Committee meeting. Thanks, Tom, for a presentation on that.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, councillors, Madam CEO, group executives, members of the public. Just thank you for you. I'm here to talk you through the Audit Committee meeting from the 22nd of May. I'll take the papers as read. It was a full agenda. We got through it with 3 minutes to spare, so that was really good. We've got three sort of key recommendations for you today. One being endorse the minutes. The next one is to approve the program of work for 23-24. And there's also a proposal for an additional Audit Committee meeting and a revised meeting schedule for the future financial years. Take any questions?
Councillor Natali?
I'm happy to
You want to move? Yeah. Okay, so no questions. Does anyone have any? You happy to second it, Councillor Hungerford? Thank you. Would you like to open?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. I have to say that this audit document that's been put together really has your stamp all over it, Tom. I can see the way that you've structured with having all of the risk reports come up front, gives the Audit Committee a really good focus on the areas that we need to deal with. So great to see that your influence now is starting to be seen in this document. And again, the comments that the Chairman has made, how professional, well put together these documents are and these reports. Thank you.
Thank you. No further speakers. Put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. You there, Terry? Yep, got you. Thank you. 8.6, thank you, Tom. 8.6 is the consolidation of local laws and subordinate local laws. Gina Burden. Thank you, Gina. Get that jigsaw upgraded.
I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council will recall that at the last ordinary meeting on 25th of May, Council adopted the amendment local laws that made changes to 7 of Council's local laws and subordinate local laws. This followed an extensive community consultation process and period, which included promoting and explaining the proposed amendments and seeking feedback and submissions from the community. The process of making the local laws is now concluded and the amendments have come into effect. This report is the final step in the statutory process which requires Council to adopt the consolidated versions of the 7 local laws and subordinate local laws so that the amendments that were made on 25th of May appear in the up-to-date versions of these local laws. Thank you.
Thank you. Someone to move, please. Councillor Natali, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Johnston, thank you. Would you like to open, Councillor Natali?
There's really not much to be said except that it is a procedural process that we have to go through, as Gina said, and just really now to vote and support bringing all these local laws together in one document.
Thank you. No other speakers? No need to close. Put the motion to the vote. All in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Gina, you can move on to 8.7, the delegation to the Chief Executive Officer, please.
Thank you, Mr. So I think I went too far. Okay. A key element of good governance is having delegations in place for the effective management and performance of Council's functions and responsibilities. There are over 160 acts and regulations that require local government and councils to do something or make decisions. And it's not practical or possible to exercise all these statutory functions solely through council resolutions at a council meeting like this, which is why the Local Government Act enables councils to delegate, which is done through instruments of delegation. A council cannot, however, delegate any matter which is expressly required in an act to be determined by resolution of council. for example, the adoption of the budget. The main instrument of delegation a council makes is to the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO, who in turn is able to sub-delegate to qualified employees of council, again through instruments of delegation. The delegation to the CEO is required to be reviewed annually, which is the purpose of this report. The last review having occurred in June 2022. To identify which powers can be delegated, Council utilises the service provided through the Local Government Association of Queensland, which provides biannual updates of all delegations relevant under Queensland legislation. Analysis of the LGAQ's register identified no material changes from Council's current instrument of delegation to the CEO. However, there are 3 regulations that were listed on their register that were not included on Council's and which officers identified as being of relevance to Sunshine Coast Council. And the 3 are the Land Regulation 2020, the Planning Act 2016, the Development Assessment Rules, and Retail Shop Leases Regulation 2016. The provisions of these regulations that are able to be delegated relate only to administrative and procedural matters, for example, the process of giving notice. Following adoption of the annual review of delegations from Council to the CEO, any updates that need to be made to the CEO's sub-delegation to Council officers and the register of delegations will subsequently be undertaken, which is our normal process. Thank you.
Thank you. So move Councillor Johnson. Have a seconder, please. Councillor Hungerford, thank you. Like to open, Councillor?
Yes, could I just ask a question of the CEO? Can you assure us, as this is a live streamed meeting, and just asking a question, I know the answer, but constituents may not. Can you assure us that if any matter that comes before you for delegation, that if there's anything controversial or likely to be controversial about it, that you will refer it to the council first? Within reason.
Yes. Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you for that question. And as some of my very wise colleagues would say, that this is not an abrogation of responsibility, but merely a delegation of responsibility. Did I say that correctly? It's very much about using judgment the whole way through. Of course, giving an undertaking that I would never put forward anything controversial, that is a judgment call and relies on all of you as well as all of my team to notify and understand those issues. And the more we communicate, the more we can understand what constitutes that controversial nature of decision making. So, you know, whilst my undertaking is always to support you in the best way possible, yeah, we would work within the frameworks that we have and make sure that we're continuing to serve you in the best way that I can.
Thank you, Madam CEO. The councillors around this table knew that, but I just wanted to make sure that the constituency did also. This is a sensible thing to do, to give these delegation responsibilities. Otherwise, council meetings would go on probably for days. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Encourage everybody to vote for it.
There are no further speakers. You don't need to close, Councillor. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Say that again. Was that a question or an instruction? Oh, well, yeah. Thank you. I think that was unanimous. Thank you, Councillor. We're going to move on. Thank you, Gina. We're going to move on to 8.8, which is the review of local government infrastructure plan. Presentation from Julie Edwards. Thank you, Julie. Welcome also to Mark and Kylie. Good to see you, Kylie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report relates to the Local Government Infrastructure Plan, better known as the LGIP. And firstly, a very quick update on its importance. Most notably, the ability of a council to charge a developer in respect of trunk infrastructure provided by a council and required to service their development site is limited to the projects listed in the LGIP, and without a lawfully adopted LGIP, a council cannot levy charges. The trunk infrastructure networks covered by this council are transport, that is roads and active transport, parks and also land for community facilities, and stormwater, which includes stormwater quality devices. The process for making a new LGIP or even amending a current LGIP is very extensive, time-consuming and expensive. However, it's a very worthwhile exercise in that Council is currently receiving above $27 million a year from development contributions. When a council has lawfully adopted LGIP, it is required to review that LGIP every 5 years. Sorry, could I have the first slide, ladies? Thank you. It's required to review that LGIP every 5 years. The Sunshine Coast's current LGIP was effective from the 29th of June back in 2018. But Council has now undertaken the required review process, as commenced by the Council resolution on the 26th of May last year, 2022. When a council has completed its review, it must notify the department as to whether it intends to make a new LGIP, or make some changes, or do nothing. The curious thing is that once it's notified its intention, it doesn't have a timeline to actually do the work. So in this instance, it is recommended that Council prepare a new LGIP, Mr Mayor, and that this be prepared for commencement with the new planning scheme. The reasons for preparing the new LGIP are listed in the report. But wait, there's more. We're coming back to you next month. Just to confuse matters, we're bringing another report to you on the LGIP, which is for the adoption of an interim LGIP to get us through to our new town plan in 18 months' time. But Mr Mayor, today's report and recommendation relates to the major review of the LGIP, which we've just undertaken, and this new LGIP, as I said earlier, will come into effect with our new planning scheme. The recommendation is on the board before you, and I draw your attention to the third dot item in particular, in that in order to keep the process moving during the local government election period, we are also seeking delegation through to the CEO to continue this work in order that we can catch up with the planning scheme in time for its introduction next year. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Someone to move? Councillor Suarez, seconded Councillor Hungerford. You'd like to open, Councillor Suarez?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. I think it's fairly straightforward. It's just, we've had the review. It's required because we need to update it due to development projections, our stormwater infrastructure, and just to make sure that we're aligning with our trunk infrastructure ready for our planning scheme. So not too much else to it. I hope everyone supports it today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about what LGIP can possibly be used for and changed. Is it possible to change some of the things, like for instance, where we've got footpaths that connect towns, cycleways, district parks, and also something like the Mary Cairncross environmental proposed Mary Cairncross environmental reserve. Can money be used for those? And secondly, are they currently part of LGIP? And if not, can they be extended to be included in LGIP calculations?
Mr Mayor, first of all, things are only listed in the LGIP where they're considered to be trunk infrastructure and they're limited to certain networks. In the case of roads, it does include active transport, but only where that active transport is seen as being a trunk connector, not a local pathway, for example. In the case of parks and lands for community facilities, we can, of course, use it for what we deem to be trunk parks and things, and that goes in accordance with our open space planning. So it would have to be notified in our open space plan as to what we're proposing to do to service our growing population over the 15-year horizon. If it were included in those plans, then it may make it into the LGIP. There are other caveats on that, Mr Mayor. For example, there is a priority infrastructure area, and that doesn't go to places like Mullaney and the areas that can't be serviced with sewer and water up on the tablelands. So I'm not sure. I will get you a better answer on the Mary Cancross issue, but I'm fairly certain that would be a no, Mr Mayor, but there's a caveat that I will investigate on that one.
Just one further question, please. Where we wish to put, say, an active transport facility on a road which is a state road, is that able to be done?
I'm fairly certain if that it appeared in the active transport plan as a missing link on a trunk road, that we would be able to fund that. But first of all, it needs to be in the active transport plan, and also inside the priority infrastructure area. And at that point, we can pick it up and put it into the 15-year horizon.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, for instance, the new footpath from the top of the hill in Nambour connecting the town through to Blackwell Range Road, that was a LGIP funded project. That's the sort of thing you're talking about.
If it was an LGIP funded project...
It's a main road, yeah.
But it's a main road. Yeah, well, if it's a main road, it wouldn't have been in LGIP. It would have been a TMR funded road, wouldn't it?
No, it was LGIP.
Was it?
This council had a big debate about it, actually. Oh, not this council, the previous council had a big debate about it.
Kylie?
Anyway, I'll bow to superior knowledge.
Longer knowledge, certainly.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. Certainly, there was a bit of a confusion, I think. Any facility that is a footpath or a ancillary to the back of curb, behind the curb, is considered to be a council asset, and we can do an active transport upgrade using LGIP funding if it is back of curb. If it was within the curb and is a line marking for a cycle lane or an active transport facility that's within the curb, then that is within the state government's remit, not ours.
Thank you, Kylie. Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I totally support the need to have this, and obviously any community that doesn't prepare an infrastructure plan and doesn't take the money that is available is not servicing its community well. I just want to raise a couple of anomalies. Like the government requires us, in a lot of the activities that council does, to undertake full cost recovery. And in this particular case, with infrastructure for development, the development industry is not subjected to the same sort of requirements that we are. And then we're about to go through a new town plan. There's a lot of uplifting in terms of value for landowners, in terms of height and additional yield that they can get. And there's absolutely no benefit for the community other than those people who benefit from, the landowners. So, for me, I see those anomalies as just particularly difficult for a community that's growing like us, that we can't somehow find some way of benefiting from, from those processes. And ultimately, the pressure is always there. It doesn't, as you mentioned, cover all of the costs. It's, 60% of the trunk infrastructure, only in those 70% of those priority areas. And there's plenty of areas that will miss out. So, you know, there's still a lot of pressure on our budgets, as we've seen today, to be able to continue to keep pace with growth. But I just wanted to make those points that I think the community sort of often questions the fact that we just keep giving all of these additional benefits to landowners when we change the planning scheme, and there's actually nothing that comes back for the community for that benefit.
Thank you, councillor. Let me go to councillor Hungerford.
Probably to follow on from that, I'll point out why this is very critically important for us to do. Under section 25(3) of the Planning Act 2016, council is required to review this every 5 years and have it up to date. If you don't, you can't charge for it. Now, the current one was effective on the 29th of June 2018, so we're well and truly got to get this underway. And the interim one we got in between is much needed, so I'm looking forward to that next month. The reason is, if we can't charge for this, currently we've got a ceiling. Make sure I've got my figures right here, tell me if I'm wrong, but we're capped at 70% that we charge the developers, and the ratepayers are picking up the other 30%. But if we don't have an LGIP in place, that means the ratepayers will be picking up 100%. That's the urgency of this and why it's very important for us to do this, because it's part of our sustainable financial management. So if we don't do this, this will hit our bottom line and our budget very hard. So it's very important we get this right. That delegation to the CEO to, in a timely manner, progress this, especially under the Minister's guidelines, is critically important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Law.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Obviously, we need to progress and move through this so that, for the reasons Councillor Ted has just said. But I would like to ask the CEO to note one of the projects that's in the LGIP funding, and also to alert my colleagues to this. We have a missing link on Windsor Road in Nambour that has been reviewed by the traffic team. They have found an alternate way to develop and deliver this project on the ground that has reduced the cost by over 50%. Now, that moved the project in terms of cost benefit to the community into the 2031 to 2036 part of the LGIP. And for the community, that still remains too far in the future. We're talking about 300 metres of unconnected road that is currently a gravel road about 1.5 kilometres from the CBD of Nambour, but is also an actual road block to the way that traffic moves through the school precinct. So in this precinct that is being blocked and having an entry and exit removed, we have the Nambour TAFE, we have Burnside State School, we have Burnside Primary School, and we have the Burnside Special School. We have the Sunshine Coast Children's Therapy Centre, and we also have, at the end of Windsor Road, one of the biggest mail sorting offices. We also have a very busy and extensive industrial precinct where all of the units in that precinct are currently full. And while this is predominantly an issue around school time, businesses who are operating in that area are severely disadvantaged during school drop-off and school pick-up time, where it can take upwards of 40 minutes to navigate this way. And if you wanted to go and visit a business at a particular time, extremely difficult. But leaving that aside, I would like to, with no one disagreeing, I guess, to ask the CEO to look at bringing this forward into the next 5 years between now and 2031 as we're reviewing this and as it comes back to us in the July OM. So if you would, through you, Mr Mayor, if the CEO is able to do that within the structure of LGIP, to consider bringing this project further forward, obviously by the OM then needing the support of my colleagues to achieve that.
Do you want to make any remarks around that, Madam CEO, in terms of timeliness, ability, funding and so on?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you. I note your request, Councillor. I can't commit to actually moving the timeframes, but happy to have a look at that in the context of the projects that we have listed for LG.
Okay. No further questions. Let me go to Councillor Suarez. Thank you. Sorry, I missed my notes.
Thank you. I don't really need to summarise too much. I think Councillor Hungerford, presented a great argument as to why we need to do it. We need to do it quickly. And to Councillor Law's point, I think every councillor in this room has a pressing project that they'd like to have brought forward. So I appreciate the CEO's comment that everything has to be looked at in context to the other priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks very much, Julie and Kylie and Mark. We're moving to item number 8.9, which is the... Come on, Megan. Stick with the plan. Disposal of easement of part of council freehold land at 36 Willowood, Crescent, Nambour. Thanks very much, Lee.
Through you, Mr Mayor. The report has been submitted to seek an exception from Council in accordance with Local Government Regulation 2012. The exception seeks to dispose of land by way of easement at 36 Willowood, Crescent, Nambour to allow private sewer infrastructure to be constructed. Council owns the adjoining the land at 36 Willowood, Crescent, Nambour. The adjoining land at 41 Glenbrook Drive, Nambour is owned by a private developer. The private developer is undertaking a reconfiguration of lot to establish 11 residential lots. As part of this application, the developer is required to establish suitable service connections. Council's land is outlined in red on the attached plan and is held for drainage and park purposes. The developer's land adjoins council to the right-hand side. The approximate easement location is defined in blue, with the easement plan showing a need for a 218 square metre easement. The plans are also available in attachments 1, 2 and 3 of this report. Council has reviewed the location of the easement and has determined that the identified location is the most suitable point to traverse Council's land and connect to the existing sewer network. The sewer infrastructure will not impact Council's existing or future use of the reserve, as the installation will not disturb the surface of the land nor remove any trees. The infrastructure will be underground, constructed using a tunnel boring technique and at a suitable depth as appropriate to Council. Council is able to dispose of the land via easement where an exception applies. In this case, an exception applies to the disposal as it's to the adjoining owner of land. The developer will also be responsible for the payment of all costs to facilitate the easement, as well as consideration for the diminished value of the land. It is recommended that Council resolve to apply an exception under Section 236 of the Local Government Regulation 2012, allowing the establishment of an easement to support the required sewer infrastructure for the adjoining private development. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Someone to move? Councillor Law, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Babarowski, thank you. Would you like to open, Councillor Law?
Yep. Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the report. It's one of those matters that needs to be resolved to allow the development to occur. I guess it's preferable if these things can be done without the need for easements and so on that council have to organise on behalf of developers. However, we need to allow the development to happen and provide, obviously, as we all know, much needed accommodation for our community. So I urge your support in this, please, councillors, so that we can allow the developer to move ahead and get this work done. Thank you, and nothing else to comment. No questions either.
Thank you. No further speakers. Put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Lee. Thank you. We've got one petition, 10.1, which I understand Councillor Landsberg wishes to move and speak to, but will be tabled by Councillor Cox. So, Councillor Landsberg, would you like to deal with that now, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. This is just a petition on behalf of a resident Pelican Waters, Mr Greg Clutton. We have 91 signatures on this, and it's in relation to the growing population in Pelican Waters, Golden Beach and Diamond Head. and the lack of, obviously, skate park for enjoyment for the younger crew down there. So, yeah, I'd just like to pass it on to the CEO for her action. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Landsberg. I'll take you as the mover. Councillor Cox, you are happy to second it. All those in favour of receipt? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, item 10.3, confidential session. Councillors, before we move into confidential session, do any of you wish to declare any personal interest in relation to the items to be discussed? If you do, you are also required to declare those interests when council resumes open session to make the decisions for this item. In relation to item 11.1, the Chief Executive Officer advises that this report contains confidential information regarding negotiations relating to the taking of land by the local government under the Acquisition of Land Act 1967. For this reason, it is recommended that council close the meeting under sections 254J (3) of the Local Government Regulation 2012 to consider and discuss the information in this report. Noting, of course, that council's decision on this item will be made during the open session, which will be viewable by the public. Councillors, is someone prepared to move that we close the meeting to discuss agenda item 11.1? Councillor Hungerford moves, seconded by Councillor Cox. Thank you. Let me just record that. Let's all those in favour of moving into confidential session? That's unanimous. So we're now, we're now wait for the live stream. On item 11.1, Councillor Law. Yes. Thank you. You're happy to move? Yes, I've got that, and I've got Councillor Natoli seconding. Nothing you'd like to say about it? It's pretty self-explanatory. Is there anyone who'd like to speak to it? No? No need to close. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. You're right, Councillor Landsberg? Oh, you're back on screen. Good, thank you. Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks very much, Nick. That brings us to the end of our meeting at 22:26. So I'll close this ordinary meeting. Thank everybody for their input. It's been a good day with the budget and the meeting now done.